Thank you all for coming, and thanks to all those of you who are online. So there, I think, are some people online who don't know who I am, so I'll just introduce myself. I'm Jonathan Larson. I'm the Director of Training and Education for the Department of Data Science, where we are now. And today we're going to talk about navigating disagreement. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to cover, I have some preliminaries to get through. Then we're going to go through the entire timeline of a disagreement from before to after. Then we're going to do some goal setting, and then there will be time for questions and then also suggestions, because I imagine that there's going to be some experience in the room and online, and people might have suggestions of their own from their own disagreements they've had in the past. All right, so to start, preliminaries. So I encourage you to bring an example disagreement today. I think that will make the training more effective if you have a disagreement in mind. It's fine if you didn't, because I have a couple that we can use as examples. If you did bring an example of your own, keep in mind that this training is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube. So don't reveal any identifying details. That's one of the reasons for having these examples, is just because they're, generic made-up examples. And so we're not going to hurt anyone's feelings by talking about them. So what are those examples? I picked two based on what I've heard in our department. And again, if you're online and you're not familiar with our department, we do a lot of collaborative work with biomedical researchers at Dana-Farber and beyond. So the first example is about professional expertise. So pretend you're a statistician, you're working with a physician researcher. They want you to use a specific statistical analysis for the data, and you know it's not appropriate. First disagreement example. And then second, a collaborator sends you an email asking you to complete an analysis by tomorrow. You have other collaborators, other deadlines, and other work you've committed to do today. So you don't want to drop everything. So those are the two examples. But we don't have to talk about these if you want to talk about your own examples, and you can do so in a way that doesn't throw anyone under the bus. All right, I also wanted to tell you about sort of the starting point for this talk and the claims that I'm going to make as a part of this talk. So these are two books that I'm using. The first on the left is by Matthew Facciani. He is a sociologist. I believe that he's currently at Yale University, and he studies misinformation. And this book that he wrote is it's published by an academic press. It's very comprehensive and definitely targeted at an academic audience. On the right is How to Disagree Better by Julia Minson. She is a social psychologist, and she is a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. She's also affiliated with the program on negotiation. And her book is more directed at lay people. It's published by a subdivision of Penguin. But I promise that this training session is not just a book report. So I've reorganized the material and brought in other sources as well. And then I've also done some due diligence to make sure that I'm doing what I promised. So in the abstract, I had said that I'm going to cover evidence-based methods, and I wanted to make sure that was true. So anything that I included in this talk, I double-checked to make sure that there was high-quality evidence supporting it. So as an example, these are some photos of the notes section from Julia Minson's book. And you can see quite a few of the notes reference unpublished manuscripts. So any claims that were based on unpublished manuscripts, I am not including. I decided to just throw those out. Also, so I'm focused on peer-reviewed academic journal articles. Here is an example of an peer-reviewed academic journal article. This was published in 2017. It's called "It Doesn't Hurt to Ask, Question Asking Increases Liking." And just to give you a summary of the conclusions of this study, basically they were testing if you ask more questions, does that start to annoy people? And based on this study, it does not. That essentially asking more questions is just better. They did find, as a sort of a minor caveat to that there are some questions are better than others. So it's not great if you're asking 20 questions in a row of what's your favorite book? What's your favorite color? What's your favorite animal? That better questions are of two types. One is elaboration questions. So can you tell me more about that? Like very open-ended, just getting the other person to tell you more. And then the second type of high quality question is follow-up questions. So you said that this was your favorite movie. Can you tell me more about why that's your favorite movie? That kind of thing. It shows that you've been listening and you're asking for more info. So those are the conclusions of this peer-reviewed academic journal article. But as you can see at the top, it says this article has been corrected. So this is the correction from the last page. They did an audit, and they said that the audit confirmed that all the conclusions in the paper are valid. They also provided a link to the corrected results and audit materials. And I thought, well, I have access to the internet. I can click on this link. And so I went to this OSF repository, and I wanted to share some of the audit reports. So there are two reports resulting from the audit, and this is one of them. And I just thought some of the lines from this were funny. So unfortunately, the data package includes only partial data, and they could not get the missing data. And the code was only partially provided, so that's not great. But this was the part that really made me laugh. So they were trying to reproduce a figure, and they said some of the data analysis, including the contents of this figure, requires spacer or spacer package. I could not, for the life of me, get it to run. I just deeply identified with that, so I wanted to. Also spend more time trying to get this to work than I would like to admit. That was also something I related to. How many other results are reported in the text of the main manuscript that were attempted to reproduce? 47, and only 36 could be reproduced. 7 of the unable to reproduce are due to me not being able to get code to run, and 4 seem to be reporting errors. 1 changes the conclusion, but it seems to be a minor one. So that is in contrast to what they said in the correction, which was that all conclusions remain valid, although they do admit that this was a minor conclusion. So anyway, I just wanted to demonstrate some due diligence in making sure that I'm giving you evidence-based methods. And also, this is a very roundabout way for me to advertise the Marvin Vet-Zelen Symposium, which this year is focusing on reproducible research. So definitely register for this and learn ways to avoid audit results like we just saw. All right, so I think this is the final preliminary thing that I wanted to talk about. As important as it is to base our decisions on evidence, there are certain just realities we have to acknowledge. So the first one is power. It can be difficult to disagree with someone who has more power or status than you do. So I just want to acknowledge that. Even if I give you 1,000 evidence-based methods, this is tough. And I do have a request that if you have power or status, either here or wherever you work, please think about how you can make disagreement easier for your subordinates. I also want to mention control. You cannot control what other people say, do, think, etc. So we do have to acknowledge that there are limits on what we can do. Even our own thoughts and feelings are sometimes not under our control. We have like first impulses that just come to us unbidden, but we can control what we do or say. So I'm going to try and focus on what we can actually do and say in this talk. And then finally, consequences. I don't want to minimize the potential consequences of disagreeing with a supervisor or anyone else. So you're the expert on your own situation. If I suggest a method, I'm not going to say it's going to work for everyone. So you're going to have to figure out for yourself if it's feasible or not. Okay, so that was preliminaries. Now we're going to get into the disagreement timeline. We're going to spend a bunch of time on before a disagreement even occurs. So first, my advice is to highlight shared identities. People are more receptive to information coming from a member of their own group, and there's just a ton of research supporting this. A lot of this research comes from politics. So like Democrats are more likely to believe something coming from another Democrat, and same goes for Republicans. But it's also true, for other groups. Highlighting shared identities can be difficult to do during an argument. So this is something that we should try and do before disagreements even arise. So when you're getting to know a collaborator, small talk doesn't have to be a waste of time. You can get to know them as a human being and find out what do you have in common. Not just I mean, it definitely will make, I think, your work more enjoyable if you have something to talk about with the people that you work with, a shared interest or whatever. But also, it just allows you to see your coworkers as human beings, which is, I think, a pro. So before you even get into an argument, try and find things that you have in common with the people you work with. So we're going to get some practice doing this. So we're going to do a think, pair, share. If you've worked with me before, you're very familiar with these, but I know we have some people online who have not worked with me before. So a think, pair, share works like this. I'm going to give you a prompt. I'm going to give you some time to think about it. I'll have you pair up and discuss. And then at the end, we can have like a full group discussion with all of us. So there's only three people in the audience in the room. So yeah, I guess you can form a group of three. And if you're online, what I will do is open a breakout room. I don't want anyone to leave the training because they don't want to participate in a breakout room. So the breakout room is opt-in. So if you're online and you want to discuss with other people who are online, you can go into the breakout room once I open it. I haven't opened it yet. And if you don't want to do that, you can just not. So here's the prompt. I want you to think of the person you disagree with. If you brought a disagreement in mind, if you don't have a specific disagreement or argument that you're thinking of, just maybe think of a person that you're likely to disagree with in the future. And what do you have in common with them? Try and be creative. What we commonly think of as shared identities may not be things you want to discuss at work. So like I said, a lot of the research on this is based on political identity, and that may not be something you want to discuss with a coworker. Also religion, maybe not something you want to talk about at work. So be creative. All right, so before I have you think, are there any questions about what I'm asking? Okay, so spend like 30 seconds just thinking to yourself, what do you have in common with this person that you disagree with already or may disagree with in the future? All right, that wasn't a ton of time, but what I'm going to do now is ask the people in the room to group up. And for the people online, I'm going to just open the breakout room. You can join it or not. It is tough. Like, it can feel like work doing this kind of thing, like getting to know someone, coming up with small talk. And then that's often not something that like people have the energy for, or yeah, especially if you're transitioning between meetings or if you have a lot of other work to do. Yeah.
I think it's all so much easier in a true face-to-face.
Yeah.
Like if you are in a conference room with people, you're not just gonna sit there and stare at the wall
Yeah.
and like avoid eye contact with people, but like that's what we do on Zoom.
Yeah, that's how you kind of like what people do. I know that they're a runner or they're a reader,
Yeah.
something like that to create sharing.
All right, I think everyone's back in the breakout room. So we were discussing in the room ourselves about some of the like realities of working in person versus working online. That Jeremy was sharing that like if you're in a conference room with someone, you don't like stare at the wall. Whereas if you're on Zoom, it's not uncommon to either just turn off your camera and then not engage with people, or yeah. So this is challenging in like especially a remote work situation. Did anyone have any thoughts, any insights come out of that discussion that they want to share? Okay, great. So I came up with some examples that I just wanted to share. So you could talk about family status, like all of my friends have kids at this point, and so it is just a perennial, it is such an easy way to start a conversation to just ask about people's kids. If you have a shared hobby, if you have a shared upbringing, like where you grew up or you went to the same school or whatever. I also want to bring up this idea of values. Like, for example, accuracy. It can be useful to know that it's important to your coworker to be accurate or precise, or to provide high quality care for patients, or to be thorough. And this is going to come up again later when you talk about actually sort of expressing your disagreement with someone. Okay, so still talking about before you even get into a disagreement, I had asked people to take this receptiveness survey. I'm just going to put the link in the chat again because you may have registered after the email got sent out with the link. So here's the link in the Zoom chat if you want to check that out. I'm going to spoil it a little by going through the items. But before I do that, here we go. Okay. So why did I ask you to do this? In addition to knowing your counterpart, you should know yourself. And so that's why I wanted you to take this survey. So we're going to talk about the different factors of this survey and strategize. If you scored low on one factor, how can you take that into account when you eventually get into a disagreement with someone? So factor one is emotional equanimity, and it had 4 items. So this is basically about, can you keep your cool when someone says something you disagree with, or do you feel very strong emotions? So if you scored low on this factor, if you, and what I mean by low is that you would not have emotional equanimity, so you would feel very strong emotions, all these items would be reverse coded. So let's say that you feel very strong emotions when people say stuff that you disagree with. Any ideas for strategies for how to take that into account or accommodate that if you find yourself in a disagreement, or if you think a disagreement might be likely?
Definitely taking a moment, because it's that emotional trigger is, we're hardwired to feel that way as a reflex, not as a critical thinking response, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so taking a pause for sure is very useful. I mean, this comes up everywhere. You talked about we're not hardwired for, that slow, deliberate, critical thinking. That comes up in the research of Kahneman and Tversky of the system 1 versus system 2, sort of reactive thinking versus slow, deliberate thinking. It even comes up in preventing officer-involved shootings. Officer-involved shootings often occur in the first 1 to 2 minutes of the officer arriving on scene. So just getting people to stop and wait can be a really powerful and effective intervention. Any other suggestions?
That's what you said earlier about you can't control other people, you can only control how you react to.
Yeah.
So after that pause.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, think about what kind of person you want to be and how you want to act in that situation. I have another strategies. Actually, I should give credit where credit is due. So these are really taken from Julia Mintzin and her book. She was the one she's one of the original authors of this survey. So make sure that you get enough sleep. You know you're going to just encounter someone that you might disagree with. Don't be hungry. So make sure you've eaten something. Don't drink alcohol beforehand. Schedule the meeting for a time when you won't feel harried or distracted, if possible. I know that people are very busy. So thinking about how you can structure things around the disagreement to try and make sure that your emotions are, not as intense. All right, factor number 2 is intellectual curiosity. This had 5 items. So, I mean, it basically is the title, are you curious? Do you find listening to opposing views informative? That kind of thing. So if you scored low on intellectual curiosity, any suggestions for how to mitigate the impact of this factor?
I scored high, so.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, so I also struggled to think of strategies to mitigate the impact of this factor. But again, Julia Mintzin has some good ideas. So her take is that if you scored low on this factor, one of the reasons why is that maybe you're worried that you're going to be persuaded, so you're not actually seeking out very high quality information. And so it's worth pointing out that being receptive is not the same as being persuadable. So you can read high quality, like a high quality argument opposing your view and still remain convinced of your own position. Also, her other idea is that it's possible that you may just have not found high quality evidence for the opposing view. And so maybe what you can do is ask someone to find like a high quality article or documentary or something that you just haven't been able to find in your own searches. Factor number 3 is respect towards opponents. There are 4 items for this. So if you scored low on this, then it indicates that you don't respect your opponents. Any strategies for mitigating the impact of this factor? Yeah, these are tough. I'm putting you on the spot.
It's just remembering that people get information from different sources. So it's, you know, like if somebody's listening to one particular news organization, they're not getting a wide breadth. So it's like a little grace of like, okay, I understand that you're pulling source from this one source and maybe not multiple sources. And just kind of understanding that where they're getting the information from is driving their argument.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in general, working to understand the person that you're talking to is probably going to increase your respect for them. You'll see them as a human being who is like worthy of dignity and respect. And yeah, you can brainstorm different factors for why they feel or think the way they do. And some of them, you can try and brainstorm like totally reasonable reasons for why they're coming from where they're coming from. You can also brainstorm ideas for like why a kind and rational person would disagree with you. It's kind of what you just said. You could also try to think of someone you know and like who disagrees with you. Like no one, if you're only friends with people who agree with you on everything, I doubt that you have many friends or that you're like actually talking to them about stuff. So I'm sure that you can think of someone that you like deeply respect who doesn't see eye to eye with you on something. And this can be a reminder that, you know, that happens. And then we have the 4th factor, which is tolerance of taboo issues, which has 4 items. You know, so if you scored high on this, then you are tolerant of taboo issues. So like I consider my views on some issues to be sacred. That would actually be a low tolerance. So that would be reverse coded. Excuse me. So if you have low tolerance for taboo issues, any ideas for how to address that?
This one was a hard one.
Yeah.
Because everybody has the right to say what they want. Everybody has the right to have their own opinions. So to say like some points of view are too offensive to be equally represented, well, that's not right. But yes, some points of view are reprehensible to me. But at the same time, like you can't censor people. So this was very hard.
Yeah, part of these, there is like an ego factor, right? Like if your own view is seen as the only possible right answer, then that's a hard, you're never going to be convinced otherwise, right? Or ever be receptive to anything that opposes your own view. But what Erica's saying is also true that, you know, there are some fringe ideas that we're not talking about the same thing. We're not in the same agreement.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I mean, you're bringing up one of the challenges of just taking the survey that I encountered, which is like, there there are so many different situations that you could consider. It's hard to agree or disagree with any of these statements without having more specificity, which is why in that email I said you could think about just like a specific issue if you want, as long as you're consistent. But this is intended to get at sort of your general disposition. And so if you're considering, well, there's a huge range of situations, it sounds like maybe you are actually pretty receptive if you're like narrowing down the set of truly taboo issues to like a narrow subset.
There was also something I saw on the chat, but I didn't see. So.
Yeah. If we don't talk about it, we can't change minds.
Very true.
Yes.
Yeah, and I agree with, what Erica was saying too, about like this one's tricky because, I generally scored high on almost all of these, but like this one I found probably the toughest because I think most people would agree that there is like a line somewhere, but it's hard to know where exactly that line is, and there's a lot of nuance involved a lot of the time. But like I was like off the charts on the intellectual curiosity one, which I found kind of funny because like I'm literally like thinking about this one, and then I'm just like, well, I scored kind of high on this, but like so meaning I'm like receptive, but maybe like maybe there are some issues where like it is too dangerous, you know what I mean? Like it's almost like the application of that to this one. But yeah, I personally found this one the toughest to think about.
Yeah. It is very funny to me that everyone is scoring so high on intellectual curiosity in a research department.
Yeah. I was like literally off the histogram, like to the right on intellectual curiosity, and then like a little bit above the median on most of the rest of them.
Well, this is great news.
Yeah.
I think the context that you were mentioning, Donna, was also important of like who the disagreement is with, because the conclusions from this could be different depending on who you're talking to.
Yes.
Right. If you're disagreeing with like somebody within our department who is trained in statistics or computational biology or whatever, that there's going to be a different discourse there than somebody who has no training or expertise, but that's where the nature of the argument is coming from. Like that part is trickier than like a political disagreement, right? Where there's not necessarily a right answer.
Sure. Yeah, I think there is truth to that. It depends on the environment, who you're talking to. I mean, I was surprised. I think you can surprise yourself what people believe, no matter their training or background. But even in that situation, you do find that even with a single person, they may feel that for a certain category of topics, those are like lightning rods, and that you need to address those way more carefully than other topics. So I do agree with what you're saying, that the context is totally important, that it's not just who you're talking to, but also what you're talking about with that specific person. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to chime in that I don't know if I understand this correctly, but I think if we're talking about science, like medical research, I don't think there should be any taboos, things that we shouldn't talk about, because science is about skepticism that we challenge and we discuss, and we have, we make progress in knowing something we don't know before. But when I was answering these questions, I just took it liberally, like some points, some ideas, some issues. So I think there's some, maybe cultural stuff or personal stuff that we just need to respect each other. So I also scored a bit low on this topics. That's my understanding. But like if we're talking about doing research or just work or professional stuff, I think everything's up on the table. And like if I took some points of view or some issues are like science related, I probably would just answer anything is debatable.
Yeah, I think that's like a noble goal for science to be able to consider anything, to apply the scientific method to sort of any question. I mean, I think that there are scientists who would disagree with you, though. that some topics should not be, some questions we shouldn't even try and answer. So it's just useful to know that like we might think that everyone is going to agree on something because we're all part of the same group, but there is actually a diversity of opinions.
There was
Yep.
something else in the chat too.
Yeah. I think it's okay to remove yourself from a conversation if it veers toward a topic you view as taboo. Absolutely. So yeah, this training session is on navigating disagreement. That can include leaving. It's really unpleasant to, part of Julia Mintz's book, she talks about research on people given the option to like have a conversation with someone who disagrees with them or do other unpleasant things, and they choose those other unpleasant things over disagreement. So this is difficult, it's unpleasant, especially if people are talking about something that is truly taboo to you. And you always have the right to just be like, I don't want to talk about this. I mean, in a workplace environment, you can also like reach out to HR, you know, there are people who can help with this. And I don't want it to appear that I'm making the case that like in any environment, you should be able to talk about anything. There's definitely a time and a place for different conversations. The point of doing this survey and talking about learning more about ourselves and how we are tolerant or not of taboo issues is just to anticipate where we might run into trouble and how we can like either avoid that trouble or make it less bad. It's funny that this discussion of tolerance of taboo issues has led to such a deep discussion. I didn't anticipate this. This is great. Did I step on anyone? Does anyone want to have the last word on this? Okay, I did come up with some strategies. If you scored low on this, you might want to try and like engage with a taboo issue in a low stakes way. I don't recommend that you watch a YouTube video and then all of YouTube's suggestions of related content. I don't want to radicalize anyone, but just like the point is not to agree with an offensive idea, but just to be able to hear it without it ruining your day. And also, I mean, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. I'm not going to force you. All right. So again, we're discussing before an disagreement even occurs. Again, I'll make this plea that if you do have power, try and use it to create a culture of constructive disagreement. So inviting feedback, rewarding people for respectfully speaking their mind, hiring people who have demonstrated the ability to disagree respectfully, and training people to disagree after they've been hired to the extent that this is possible. I should say I am currently the one with the power in this room. I'm at the podium. I'm giving this talk. So I will invite people to disagree with me. Please feel free to raise your hand or pop in the chat. And I'll also try and just pause and ask for questions and comments as well. Okay, so now you've heard something you disagree with. We're going to pause, like we were talking about earlier, before we express our disagreement. All right, so I want to do an activity. We're going to play a game. I'm going to need a volunteer to be a musician. Not everyone at once. Sit down. Sit down. I'll explain how it works before I get a volunteer. So the musician is going to choose a song. Please choose something that most people will recognize. You'll perform the song using only tapping, clapping. You cannot sing, hum, or make any other noises with your voice. You cannot use any other instruments. You cannot mouth or act out the words. So it is just the rhythm of the song. Everyone else, whether you're in the room or you're online, will be a listener, and you need to try and guess what song the musician is performing. So I've created a survey to organize this. I'll share it in a moment, but I just want to show it to you first. So if you're the musician, there's only going to be one of you. You'll do that. You're going to enter what song you're going to perform by tapping or clapping. And I also want you to guess what percentage of the listeners do you think will be able to guess the song you choose? And you want this to be as high as possible. So this is why I'm saying choose a well-known song. And if you're not the musician, this is everyone else, you'll be a listener. And you're going to try and guess what song the musician is performing. If you don't know, you can just write, I don't know. This is completely anonymous, so there's no shame whatsoever in writing, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to clear this form. Now, okay, are there any questions before we choose a volunteer? Okay, so who is willing to be the musician? It can't be me because it's gonna be like I chose a really difficult song or something. I'm gonna rig the game.
Look at me. I really look at me. I'm just trying to think of a song.
Yay, okay. Hillary will be our musician. So I'm gonna put, are you logged into the Zoom?
No, but I just write it down.
Oh, okay, sure. Great. Hillary's writing down her song right now. I'll put the survey in the chat so other people Zoom can fill out the survey. All right, so the survey link is in the chat. You've written down the song. Have you written down the percentage that you think will guess it correct? I do have a QR code. I totally forgot, sorry. Okay, great. Whenever you're ready, Hillary, go ahead. All right, all the listeners, please fill out the
I
survey.
know what it is, I'm just trying to remember the name.
Oh, can't hear.
The background.
Oh,
All right.
I think about the.
Yeah, can you, Hillary's gonna come up to the podium.
Can you guys hear that?
Still no.
No. All right, well, that's the extent.
We can see it though, and I think that was probably good enough.
All right, I'll pull up the results. All right, has everyone entered?
This is the part that I'm the worst at, is actually knowing titles of songs.
Right.
All right, we have 8 responses. Good luck. All right, we will rock you.
Yep.
Good job. All right, that was almost 100%. Only one person did not know. All right, so that was not effective for my demonstration purposes. But good job, Hillary. So, all right, any thoughts? Well, I'm gonna have to explain to you the purpose of that because it didn't work the way I anticipated. So first I can tell you what that comes from. It comes from a dissertation, The Rocky Road from Actions to Intentions, by Elizabeth Newton. And the point is, so generally what happens is people choose a song that is less rhythm forward and more melody forward. And people in general do a very poor job of guessing what the song is. But the musician usually thinks, oh, like 80% of people will get this right. What was your guess, by the way, for percentage?
I was thinking like 80%.
Okay.
I figured it might be a little bit higher, but it's getting pretty.
Yeah, which happened. Yeah, so usually the musician, guess a really high value, and then people are generally not able to figure it out what the song is. So the point of this is that usually people can't guess because they don't have all the information, but that the musician does have all the information, so they think it's going to be easy. And so the point of this activity is that usually we think that we're communicating all of this stuff, but only a small fraction of it is actually being received. Maybe I will not do a live demonstration of this next time. So I included this because we're talking about, after you hear something that you disagree with, but before you express your disagreement. So it's possible that the person who's talking is actually what they're saying is maybe not what they think they're saying. And so we should pause and make sure that we are truly understanding what they're intending to say. Also, disagreement gets mistaken for bad listening. So something to keep in mind, you want to make sure that the person who's talking truly understands that you have listened before you express your disagreement, or they're going to think that you just didn't hear what they said. I also want to talk about a specific study. Excuse me. So this is a paper from 2018. The paper actually included 25 different experiments. We are going to talk about not all 25 of them. The first 15, I'm excluding them because they generally had to do with people like looking at photographs and trying to interpret what was going on in the mind of the person in the photograph, and it didn't seem super appropriate. So we're going to talk about these other ones that actually involve like in-person interactions. So this is how these experiments worked. They all involved different activities or tasks, I should say, among pairs of people. So as you can see, some of the pairs were partners. This means romantic partner. Unfortunately, I couldn't find in the paper how long they had been together. But in a separate part of the paper, which I will talk about in a moment, some of them were married. So I think some of these people had been like in long-term romantic relationships. And then some of the pairs were just of strangers that did get to like introduce themselves to each other, but they didn't know each other beforehand. And then you can see that these tasks have different names: activities, movies, jokes, etc. What does that mean? So I'll run through a couple of them. For activities, participants rated how much their partner or the stranger that they're talking to liked or disliked 37 activities on 7-point scales from dislike very much to like very much. And some of these activities were go to a bar or pub, play tennis, visit with family, go bowling, etc. What's that?
Likes doing dishes.
Oh, yeah. Well, you can't have them all be fun activities. You got to get those low, dislike very much things. So the idea behind this was, okay, you're going to get a list of activities. You need to guess how much your partner, your romantic partner or a stranger, likes them on the scale from 1 to 7. Or here's a list of movies. How much do you think your partner will like or dislike these movies? And then the partner also fills out the form. And then you look at the correlation between those values. So how well can you guess what your partner likes in terms of activities or movies or jokes, videos, art, opinions, etc. These were a variety of samples, community samples, university samples, but I believe this was all in the US, even the community samples. And these are, to my understanding, non-overlapping. So those first two say community 1, the 74 people and the 66 people, those are not overlapping groups. And like I said, we're looking at correlations. So you can get a correlation between your predictions of what your partner likes or dislikes and their actual values. And these are average correlations. So this kind of makes sense that like for partners, we see 0.64 and 0.68. For strangers, guessing what movies a stranger will like, 0.4, so that's lower. Very low for opinions and strangers, 0.07, higher for opinions and romantic partners. But that was in the control group. So in the control group, they were just told, what do you think your partner is going to like? In the treatment group, people were instructed, put yourself in their shoes, try and take their perspective, see the world through their eyes. And that did not make any difference. So this is how people performed. In general, romantic partners do a little bit better. But asking someone to like take someone else's perspective did not help. And it turned out that in the 25th study, they did find something that did help, besides just telling people to take their perspective. What helped was to ask, just to ask questions. We'd like for you to ask your partner to tell you their opinions. And so here you can see the results from that 25th study. They still had a control group. They still had perspective taking. And then asking questions was called perspective getting. So they had a 20-item questionnaire. They had 3 different conditions for perspective taking. perspective getting, or excuse me, for 3 different groups for perspective getting, which just means asking questions. Perspective getting even means that people were instructed you can ask your partner about the even numbered items, but then you have to guess on the odd number items. The reverse for perspective getting odd. And for perspective getting all, participants were allowed to just ask about all the questions, all the items. And so you can see that if you're allowed to ask questions, you just do a better job. So the point of this is that you should ask questions. It's the only surefire way to get information from the person you're talking to. And this is key. Repeating back to them what they said, but in your own words, is the only surefire way to make sure that you understood what they said. It also proves to them that you've heard them. So I want to say, you cannot just say, I hear what you're saying. That is not good enough. Because anyone can say that. And actually, I cut a slide from here, but I also did have a slide about how easy it is to fake good listening. It involved a study where people were instructed to like have a face-to-face conversation, and the listener behind the talker was a screen playing like silent films, and the listener was instructed to like try and remember what the silent film was about. And they ended up doing a really good job remembering elements of the silent film. They could not remember what the person had talked about, but the talker felt like they had been listened to. So the point is, you can't just listen. You can't just be like, okay, I hear what you're saying, nodding your head. You have to actually say, this is what I heard you say. Is that correct? So say what you heard and verify. You also want to listen non-judgmentally. So don't roll your eyes. Don't scoff. So paying attention, comprehending the other's points, holding a positive intention toward the speaker, leads to people, it makes people feel more comfortable, less defensive. A non-judgmental exchange of narratives can have an enduring effect on attitudes, where enduring is 4 months. That's from a 2020 paper. So ask questions, repeat what you heard, but in your own words, and don't repeat it as though they're an idiot and what they said was stupid. I think this is my last bit of advice before you get into actually expressing your disagreement. This advice is to highlight uncertainty. So this first thing, I'm not sure that I buy it. It's from a 2005 paper that suggests that asking, how do you know, leads people to focus more on evidence than asking, why do you think that? I'm not sure if I buy that. You can check out the study. So what I forgot to say is that, all these links that you see, you can click on those once you have access to the slides. If you're in the department, I will put these slides in the shared folder, the shared Google Drive. If you are not in our department, there's a QR code at the very end of the slides that will allow you to view the slides. So you can see all these links and click on them to your heart's content. For highlighting uncertainty, you can also ask people to explain details of their opinion. Sometimes this helps them realize that they don't understand the issue as well as they thought they did. And this is pretty well supported, 3 papers on this. I think these papers found that there is like a way to do this and a way not to do this, or that it's more effective in some situations than others, but I'm forgetting the details. So definitely check out these papers to see the constraints. You can also communicate your own uncertainty. This prevents a loss of trust if you end up changing your mind, which happens a lot. And it doesn't harm trust in the moment. So there's a citation for that. Oh, okay, I have another study to walk you through, but it's going to take a few minutes, and it's 10:55 right now. So I think what we should do is let's take a 5-minute break, and we will return at 11 a.m. and we'll keep going. All right, it's 11:01. We can get back to it. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to walk through this other study. This is from 2010. There's actually 2 experiments in this study. We'll talk about both. So you may notice that in this table, there's participants and their counterparts. I found this to be a little confusing, so I want to just put these definitions on the screen so we have them. So the participant is the person participating in the study, the person who was recruited to be in the study. In this case, they were all Stanford undergrads. And all the participants oppose some unpleasant policy, and I will be more specific in a moment about what that policy is, but they're all in opposition. And then the counterpart, it's actually the experimenter. So the counterpart and the participant have this like online chat, so they didn't actually see each other. So the experimenter pretended to be another student who supported this unpleasant policy just to like create a disagreement. And they did this over chat so that they had the transcripts of the conversations that they could analyze later. So in study one, the unpleasant policy was comprehensive exams as a graduation requirement. So as you can imagine, these undergrads did not want that, so they were opposed. The undergrads were randomly assigned to one of two conditions. In both conditions, the experimenter explains why they support this unpleasant thing, comprehensive exams. In the interest condition, after explaining why they support comprehensive exams, the experimenter says, or the counterpart says, but I was interested in what you're saying. Can you tell me more about how come you think that? This sounds so awkward to me. Can you tell me more about how come you think that? But anyway, whatever, this is what they did. That was the interest condition. In the control condition, the counterpart just says, I support comprehensive exams, and this is why. They don't express an interest. So like I said, assignment was random to these two groups, and the pre-experiment view of comprehensive exams was about the same. There was no significant difference between them. So randomization was successful. But the participants rated the counterpart as more receptive in the interest condition. So this is an argument for why you should be asking these open-ended questions, that your counterpart, the person you disagree with, is going to think you're more receptive. Also, you're going to think you're more receptive. So the participants rated themselves. Oh, wait. I talked about this wrong. So for this, yeah, if you ask a question of the person you disagree with, they're going to think that you are more receptive. They're also going to think that they are more receptive. Also, what these experimenters did was they got naive judges. So they got people who were not part of the experiment to read through the transcripts of these disagreements and rate the participants on how receptive they were. And you can see that in the interest condition, the participants were rated as more receptive. So the counterpart is the one who said, tell me more about why you think the way you do. Judges who didn't know like what had happened rated the participant as being more receptive. So this is evidence that we talked earlier about how you can't change other people, you can't control other people's behavior. But this is evidence that if you are asking questions of the other person, they will become more receptive. So this is an argument for why you should be receptive, because it can influence the way that the person you're talking to behaves. And then also perceptions of typical proponents of counterpart's position. So the counterpart asked this question. The participant now has a better perception of the counterpart and people like the counterpart who support comprehensive exams. So by asking this question, this open-ended question, expressing an interest, you're not just doing yourself a favor, you're doing a favor for everyone who agrees with you. So I guess this is, if you're a statistician or a computational biologist, expressing interest like this and asking these open-ended questions, you're also helping out your colleagues who are also statisticians or computational biologists or whatever role you might be. The person you're disagreeing with is going to have a better view, not just of you, but also of your group of people. And then there's more results that I'm not going to get to. All right, that was very confusing, even with me trying to put this stuff up on the slide. Are there any questions about this experiment? Okay. So there was also this experiment 2. There was a different policy, universal veganism, for this one. So again, all the participants opposed this. They were also undergrads. They were also randomly assigned to one of two groups. Either they were a questioner. So in this case, the participants were instructed, come up with 3 open-ended questions for the speaker that will help you better understand why he feels as he does. Commenters were told, compare the speaker's views to your own. So again, random assignment, no difference in these participants' views on universal veganism at the beginning of the study. Participants self-rated receptiveness. So by getting people to come up with these 3 open-ended questions, they felt themselves to be more receptive. That makes sense. They're asking questions. And then also, they had improved perceptions of typical proponents of the counterpart's position. So people who supported universal veganism. So just by coming up with 3 questions, I should say they didn't get responses to these questions. The participants were only instructed to write the questions, and then that was it. So just by writing 3 questions, these participants felt better about supporters of universal veganism. And they also felt better about universal veganism, just period. All right, so we're going to do some more practice. For your disagreement, or for one of mine, it's up to you. Come up with 3 open-ended questions for the speaker that will help you better understand why they feel as they do. So yeah, I'm going to just give you some time to do this on your own right now. So I'll give you like a minute or 2. All right, that was about a minute, so not a lot of time. I will say that I have trouble being creative, coming up with open-ended questions. For me, like, can you tell me more about that? I think it's good. And then I kind of run out of ideas. So does anyone have any ideas of open-ended questions that they're willing to share? I guess it is a challenging task. I guess we did cover, like, why do you think that? How do you know?
The tone matters, right?
Yes.
Like, why do you feel that way? Depending on how it's phrased, you can put people on the defensive.
Yeah.
Even though that's really what you're asking.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Sometimes when I'm thinking about disagreements and trying to come up with questions like this, I do wonder how it's going to come across and what is the tone. And so what I try and do is I try and say it in like the worst way possible. And then try and go in the opposite direction. And sometimes that can be helpful. All right, we have a suggestion in the chat. What is your end goal with this study? How do you plan to use the results from the study? That's great. Why is this important to you? That's a good idea. Yeah. Keep putting those in the chat because it is difficult to come up with like new open-ended questions that you haven't already asked. Oh, I guess I did come up with some for these examples. So returning to our example 1, that's a reminder of what this example is. So why do you want to use that analysis? What questions are you hoping to answer with this analysis? Can you tell me about a time you've analyzed data like this before? So yeah, I'm not promising that these are great. They're not all good. But those are just some suggestions.
I think the second bullet is the one that comes up the most frequently for
Yeah.
us. What is the question here? What are we trying to do?
And then for boundaries, I will say that if someone sends you an email asking you to complete analysis by tomorrow, sending them a response with a bunch of open-ended questions they're not gonna like that. So maybe this is not super appropriate in this situation, but maybe like as a follow-up later, asking like why this conference or this journal, or this one, what other projects do you have going on right now? I wrote this down because I was thinking, like, why are they sending me this email the day before the deadline? maybe they have a different working style than I do. Maybe they have a lot going on. Maybe they just saw this, like, and I thought, excuse me, I thought if I asked, like, what other projects do you have going on right now that might reveal that, like, well, they have like 50 other things going on. And so maybe that's why they're only telling me this late in the game. So I don't know, that's some background for that question. When did you hear about this deadline? That is not actually an open-ended question. That's a pretty specific question and could be misinterpreted. So especially over email where you don't have tone of voice. So yeah, your mileage may vary. Okay, we are finally at the point of expressing our disagreement. So this advice, I highly value this advice. Reframe your message in terms of their concerns. So this comes from Matthew Facciani, the sociologist who studies misinformation. And he uses this example. He uses a bunch of examples. I don't want to minimize what he does in his book, but one of those examples is he talks about like flat earthers. So someone who believes that the earth is flat. You might try and come up with like a scientific argument to explain that the earth is round. Like take them to the ocean, be like, okay, do you see how that ship, we're seeing first the top of the ship as it's getting closer, and then the middle, and then the bottom, the earth is round. That is a scientific argument. They might not care about that. So Matthew Facciani points out that it might be very important to someone that they see themselves as a contrarian. And so if you try and convince them to take the mainstream view, you're essentially taking away something from them. If they switch their opinion to the mainstream view, they lose this part of themselves of being a contrarian. So you have to sort of let go of your own, what you think is important and what convinced you of your position, and say, what do they actually care about? It's actually not dissimilar to that book about the 5 love languages. You know, it's not so much treat other people how you want to be treated, but treat other people how they want to be treated. So yeah, just some evidence for this. So this 2015 study, political arguments reframed to appeal to the moral values of those holding the opposing political position are typically more effective. Conservatives are more likely to express concern about climate change when framed as a national security concern and communicated by members of the armed services. Or white evangelicals who received a religious message equating mask use with loving your neighbor were more likely to see mask use as important and were more supportive of mask mandates. Maybe just one more example is when it comes to vaccination, it may be very important to them, their like conviction that pharmaceutical companies are greedy and corrupt. And so if you try and convince them that vaccines are safe and effective, you're taking away the support for this belief that they hold very strongly. And so you have to like navigate around that. Okay. So we are going to get some practice in this. For your disagreement, I want you to think about, what does the person that you disagree with care about? And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about highlighting shared identities, and I talk about values. So maybe they care about accuracy. If they're a physician, maybe they care about providing high quality care for patients. Maybe they care about publishing in high impact journals. Maybe they want to be promoted. Who knows? What do they care about? If you are having trouble with this, go to moralfoundations.org. So this website was created by generally psychologists, primarily Jonathan Haidt, Jesse Graham. I will say Jonathan Haidt is the person who wrote The Anxious Generation, which is a very popular book. This research on moral foundations is like older research that he did. But these are some moral foundations: care, fairness, loyalty, authority, purity. And they've broken it up. They've added some at the end. If you want to look at equality, proportionality, liberty, honor, ownership, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're having trouble thinking of the person you disagree with and what they care about, you can go to this website, moralfoundations.org, and get some ideas. And I want you to reframe your message in terms of what they care about. Okay. Any questions about what I'm asking? Okay, I'm going to give you some time to do this on your own. So go ahead. All right, I think it might be useful to have some small group discussion on this. So I'm going to open up a breakout room for anyone who wants to join the breakout room online. You're free to do so. And then for those of us in the room, maybe we can have a small group discussion ourselves. Any thoughts?
This one's hard, I think. Sometimes it feels like the people we're disagreeing with, the thing that they care about is just being right.
Yeah.
And that's not really one of the listed values on that website, but there is a core identity there somewhere. But knowing exactly what it is, it's hard to figure out.
I was thinking about the boundaries, like you need to get this done by tomorrow.
Yeah.
And well, no is a complete sentence.
Yes.
A lot of times I just say, like, I appreciate that this is very important to you and it's a very tight deadline, but unfortunately, I cannot do that because of other priorities. But if there's anything I can do to help move this forward for you in the future, let me know. But it is hard to kind of suss out somebody's motivation or their moral foundation if you're not very familiar first.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's totally true. So sometimes you can get at that if you ask, like, why is this important to you? But that can be, as we discussed earlier, a difficult question to ask in a way that doesn't make them defensive or whatever. Close the room. So we have 60 seconds before people rejoin. In that email, what do you include? What was that, all the stuff that you said? I recognize this is important to you.
Right, but I cannot complete it in the deadline you require because of other priorities on my plate.
Yeah.
But in the future, if you need help with this, let me reach out. Or if it's something like I can't do it by tomorrow, but I can have it done by Thursday. I can carve out time for you to do it on Thursday.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes the deadline is actually tomorrow.
Yeah, asking if there's any flexibility on the deadline or if there's any like real reason for the urgency or something.
Right.
Or any alternatives. I think people don't like being told no, even though that's in my case what we should be doing more of. But I think they don't like hearing that there are priorities above them.
Right. Yeah, some people are, I would say it's 50-50. Like people are like, oh, okay, I get it, I understand. And half is like, but why?
Yeah.
Who's more important than me?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I think everyone's back from the breakout room, and we have a message in the chat. A very effective method I have used is to tell them that reviewers from journal, CTEP, FDA, et cetera, might challenge their proposal. Zion, do you mind saying more about that?
Yeah, just sometimes if the investigator they ask for a design, they want to do something, and I think that's not reasonable. I'll just tell them that either the grant reviewer or CTAP or reviewer or FDA reviewer, they would challenge that idea and pick it out and disapprove. So usually that changed their mind very quickly.
That's good to hear that that's effective. Yeah, I would argue that this is an appeal to authority. You're saying, well, if you don't believe me, then for sure you'll believe the FDA. Yeah. Yeah, anyone else want to share anything? from online? In the breakout room, did you have any insights you want to share? No pressure.
I can share from the breakout room. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Um, this kind of pertains to like last minute requests. I sometimes phrase my output as like I can't do as excellent or thorough work if this unrealistic timeline is in place. Whether or not that's true and you work extra and do that, maybe doesn't matter, but like the expectations of the timeline is not going to produce the level of work that I feel proud about or that they should feel confident in.
Yeah. So inherent in that is, your inherent in that is a value of like high quality.
Mhm.
And so you're hoping that by appealing to, we need to make sure that our work is of high quality, that that's something they'll care about. Which I think a lot of people do. I bet if you're in the circles that we work in, people generally care about doing high quality work.
Mhm.
Yeah. On a related note to Morgan's there, a situation that I came across recently is one that happens here and there for me is sort of like the issue wasn't like a last second timeline, but rather that people want to take a project to a specific conference when there's like not yet adequate follow-up. And one I had recently, the investigators were basically they believed strongly that like their preliminary what they're seeing in the clinic is that that the treatment under study basically is exciting and that they're anxious to sort of get results out there. But it was pretty there was endpoints that definitely needed at least 1 year follow-up to be like properly reported on, and they were not like really particularly close to clearing that threshold. So it was sort of talking them down from really badly wanting to get to that conference. And a line that I went to was that if it's this important, then it's important that we do it right and that we like do it properly and that we don't come out with a message prematurely that then has to be walked back or anything like that. So and that seemed to strike a good note with them, and they eventually yielded. But it was a tricky one.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. It reminds me of this thing called narrow framing, which sometimes happens in decision making. So if you hear people talk about, we have to do this, or we are choosing between these two options. Sometimes people have convinced themselves that there are only two options, or only one in this case, like we have to submit to this journal. And sometimes what you can do is get people to actually expand their idea of what is an option and say, do we have to do this particular journal, this particular conference? Like getting people to see that there are more options than just the ones they have in their head can sometimes be effective.
That's actually exactly what happened, was that I proposed the alternative suggestion of a different conference that was like 3 months later, and I think they were more excited about the first one was a bigger one, but with the preponderance of the situation and the follow-up being where it was, they eventually agreed. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Hi, Emily. When I can't or don't want to do something, my favorite method is to offer two alternative choices, both of which I'm okay with. It gives the other person the illusion of getting what they want since they got to choose. That is very clever.
Great idea.
That works with kids too, I hear.
Yeah, I actually was gonna say something. Yeah, as someone who now has a 2-year-old, that's quite effective. It's like tricking him into thinking that it's his choice.
And Emily says I'm the mom of a toddler. That is awesome. Thank you so much. Anything else?
I guess I'll share mine, which is on the theme of like reproducibility. And one of like the obstacles that I'm dealing with my collaborator is that he wants the work we're doing now to corroborate and align with work that he had done previously, and sort of like wanting to adjust the way we do the analysis so that it corroborates like past work. And one way I thought of sort of reframing this is like if we, do things more reproducibly now, like reproducible analytical methods, then in the future, we won't run into this issue of like needing to corroborate the work we're doing now. So like basically by, you know, we're almost like shooting ourselves in the foot by trying to continually make the work now match something that was previously done.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like the value there is future you. Like if you
Yeah.
care about future you, do this for them.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Hey, Elizabeth. Question for the group. When is a time that you have disagreed with a person, reframed your message in terms of their concerns, listened and changed your perspective? What did they do or say that convinced you? That is a good question. Is anyone willing to share?
I don't know if I completely changed my perspective, but it gave me more, like just opening that conversation gave me more insight into what they were thinking. So I could step a little bit closer to what they wanted and they could step a little closer to what I'm not sure I completely changed my perspective about the situation, but it just helps to maybe take a step closer to reach an agreement.
Yeah, there's a lot of research on discussions across partisan divides, discussions between people who disagree with each other. And if they're not facilitated properly, people can become more polarized. But if they are facilitated properly, you do see people coming more closer to the center. So I think it sounds like, yeah, your experience is common. Yeah.
I also feel like, so I don't know what fraction of disagreements fall under this, but I also feel like if you take time and ask more questions, often there isn't actually a disagreement. It's just a miscommunication being disguised as disagreement.
Totally.
That's true.
Anyone else? So I do want to say, I recommend this just as an exercise. In preparing for this talk, I did go through each of those moral foundations and each of the two examples and changed the message. And it was hard, but it got me to think about these things in a way that I had not before. So we don't have to read all of these, but just like trying to reframe what you're saying for different concerns, I think just makes you a more flexible thinker. And it gave me more perspective on like what other people might care about and how they might see what we're talking about. But some of them were harder, like purity. Doing the analysis you suggest would contaminate the report as a whole. We want the whole thing to be unimpeachable. I don't know if that's actually effective. Or my body is a temple and it needs sleep. I don't know if they're going to buy that, but coming up with these things just as an exercise was, I think, fruitful. Okay, so I'm also going to give you another framework for expressing your disagreement. The HERE framework, this is from Julia Minson and her lab, the Constructive Disagreement Lab. It has a nice acronym, HERE. The first is hedge. So it can make you sound more humble and decrease your collaborator's desire to argue. So using phrases like I think, likely, may, probably, etc. You may not actually, it may not be the case that you think or that you're saying something is likely true. You may know for sure that something is true. But just couching it in these terms can make it easier for the other person to accept them. Emphasizing agreement is also a good strategy. So finding something you can agree on is good. Acknowledging what they've said, like we were talking about earlier. I think you said this, is that right? Restate what the other person said in your own words. And then also reframing to the positive. So use positive emotion words and avoid no, can't, or won't.
I know Meredith has echoed some of these before, especially the second and the fourth one.
Yeah.
She often says that she will say yes and nod her head, even though the words that follow are contradictory to that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Depends on the person, obviously, but some people just don't like being told.
Yeah. There's this very famous study that I learned about as an undergrad, so it's very old at this point, where the experimenters went into like a library where there was a copy machine, and someone was using the copy machine, and the experimenters would go up and say, "Can I use the copy machine?" Even though they could see that someone was already using it. And what they found was if they said, "Can I use the copy machine because I'm in a rush?" people were more likely to be like, "Oh yeah, sure, you go ahead." But also, if the experimenter said, "Can I use the copy machine because I need to make some copies?" people were just as likely to say, "Oh yeah, you're sure, go ahead." And it was the word "because" that was prompting people to be more willing to let go of the copy machine. They heard "because," and even if it wasn't followed by an actual reason, that was enough to make them think that there was a reason following it. I'm not sure if that has been replicated. I'm not sure how robust that finding is. It's also related to the research of Robert Cialdini, who was very famous for studying influence, and he talks about other similar things that are sort of like cues that change people's behavior, but you should fact check that. And then this is just from that study that supports the HERE framework. I don't think I'm going to go through those in detail. But I will say, also from the study, so what they did was they had people have like a back and forth, again, over a chat, so they could see all the transcripts. The participants in this study were government workers who were doing an executive education program at Harvard Kennedy School. And they were paired up based on such that the pairs disagreed on something, and then they had this exchange. And what they found was that if they looked at the opening statements, there was no correlation between the partners' linguistic receptiveness. But the algorithm's measure of the conversational receptiveness was highly correlated in the remaining 4 rounds. So this is just more evidence, not so much experimental evidence exactly in the way we want it to be, but it is evidence that the way you talk influences the way that people talk to you. So again, we can't control what other people do or say, but to a certain extent, we can influence other people's words. And if we speak in a way that is receptive, maybe they will also be receptive back.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is there, in these studies where having the chat is obviously great because you can see everything happen, but people talk online differently than they do talk in person. Is that taken into effect in these types of studies, or?
Yeah, that is a good question. I did not look at any studies where they looked at people like in face-to-face conversations in terms of the language that they used and like the resulting transcript. But yeah, I would imagine, yeah, if you can't see the person, I think there is, I mean, we know that people can be a lot meaner.
Right.
If you're online.
I mean, granted, like probably a majority of our conversations with our collaborators are, via email or chat or something like that. So I guess that's reflective of today's work environment.
Yeah.
But
yeah, but you're right. It would be nice to know for sure. Yeah. That is a good question. All right. Another piece of advice when you're expressing your disagreement is that personal narratives build trust. This is found in this Hogman et al. 2424 study. It's also, if you may remember that on an earlier slide, I talked about a non-judgmental exchange of narratives. That's from a 2020 study that also showed that talking about your personal experience builds trust like this. And so this is an option. Again, it may be the case that you're basing your opinion based on like facts and logic and evidence, but that might not be what convinced the other person. So telling a story might be more convincing, or at least they'll see you as a human being and not just an opponent. I think this can be hard to do in a workplace setting in like especially for our work, you don't necessarily want to be talking to a physician collaborator and being like, well, when I was a child, we did this statistical analysis. I don't know, but it's an idea. Maybe you are more creative than I am. And then finally, after the disagreement. So Matthew Fasciani, the sociologist, recommends repeat. That you need to keep having conversations. You need to keep doing this over and over again. You're going to disagree again. You need to keep finding ways to make those disagreements constructive. Keep building these relationships. So it's not like you do this once and then you're good forever. Oh, I like this study. I'm glad there's time to talk about it. Okay, I also wanted to give you some hope. So I want to tell you about this cool study. This is from PNAS. Okay, so first, in this study, participants were asked to rate how human certain groups are. I know that sounds gross, bear with me, but they were asked to rate certain groups from 0 to 100, where 0 is more dehumanizing, 100 is more human. I know it sounds gross, bear with me. So in the upper left-hand corner, the participants were Republicans. So they were answering this question, rate these groups on how human they are. The groups were Republicans and Democrats. So Republicans were asked, how human are Republicans, how humans are Democrats? I want you to guess, even just to yourself, what you think these bars are going to be like. This is a bar chart. So just think in your head, where do you think those bars are going to be?
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Are you saying specifically targeted Republicans, Democrats were asked to say how it would on that scale, or just a random?
Yes. So this was a representative sample of around 1,000 people that was approximately balanced, about 500 Democrats, about 500 Republicans. Any other questions? Here are the bars. And the difference between the bars is 22 points on this scale. So that was Republicans. They also asked Democrats, how human do you think Democrats are, and how human do you think Republicans are? So maybe you can guess to yourself what these bars are going to look like. Here are the bars. Same exact difference, 22 points, nearly identical. Any questions on this first part of the study? Okay, the next part is, I think, the cool part that gives me some hope. Although I may have to explain why it makes me hopeful. Okay, in the lower right-hand corner, again, we're asking Republicans, but we're asking Republicans, how would Democrats answer this question? So we're asking Republicans, how would Democrats rate the humanity of Democrats and Republicans? So guess in your head what you think these bars are going to look like. And here they are. So Republicans had a more pessimistic, more cynical outlook. They think that Democrats are going to see Republicans as less human than they actually do. They did the same thing for Democrats. Okay, Democrats, how do you think Republicans are going to answer this question? Similarly cynical. So the point of this is, say you've had some disagreement with someone. You might think things are bad, all is lost. They think you're a terrible person. Their opinion of you may actually be higher than you think it is. It may not be as bad as you're anticipating. So even if you disagree with someone, it's okay. I hope. There's still hope. Any questions about that? You may not find it as helpful as I do, but I like it. All right, so now I want us to engage in some goal setting. So we've talked about the full timeline of the disagreement. I want you to consider either an ongoing disagreement that you've got in your life, or a person you have a high probability of disagreeing with in the future, or an issue you have a high probability of disagreeing about in the future. and I want you to write down some goals. So I'll give you a minute or two to do that right now. All right, just in the interest of time, we'll move on. I'm not going to ask you to share your goals, but I'm not going to leave the topic of goals just yet. So I want to talk about types of goals. So I want to talk about the columns of this 2x2 table first. We have mastery and performance. Mastery goals are focused on mastering a skill. Performance goals are focused on performance relative to others. On the rows, we have approach and avoidance. So approach goals focus on achieving or obtaining something, and avoidance goals focus on preventing or escaping something. So we can make a 2x2 table for these. For mastery approach goals, we want to successfully master a skill. Like I'll ask someone to tell me more about their position. For performance approach, we want to outperform other people. So like I will win this argument. For mastery avoidance goals, we focus on avoiding failure. Like I won't yell. And for performance avoidance goals, these are about avoiding performing worse than others. Like I just don't want to get yelled at. These goals are bad. So performance avoidance goals in general, they tend to lead to higher anxiety levels and worse performance. So even if you're trying to avoid poor performance, setting these, having that be your goal is generally not going to get you what you want. Also, if you don't want to get yelled at, you just can't control that. I was once yelled at by a driver because I was using a crosswalk and I had the wrong signal. So sometimes you do everything you can and people still yell at you. So if you have on your list of goals any performance avoidance goals, see if you can move them to the upper left-hand corner and make them mastery approach goals. That is my recommendation to you. I also recommend that as you go on and have more disagreements, which I'm sure you will have, try and adopt a growth mindset. So each disagreement is an opportunity to get better. There's a ton of evidence for this, all the advantages of having a growth mindset. And that is the last of my advice. So I'm going to open up for questions and also suggestions. I'm sure that people have like real life suggestions of strategies that have worked for them. So if you have any questions or anything you want to share with the group, please go ahead. And while we're discussing, I'm also just going to put up the QR code to view these slides if you want to, but you don't have to. Any questions or comments or suggestions? Zihan did respond to Elizabeth's question about not changing their mind per se, but if their argument is somewhat valid, taking their points into consideration and discussing with other statisticians.
I guess I will solicit advice from the larger group. One of the issues I have with my collaborator, or so, let me start by saying, so I feel like one of the overarching like tools to use in disagreements is like the one of like curiosity, like continue to ask more questions, ask open-ended questions, and like continue to seek information. Um, and I think one of the issues I have is that the person I collaborate with tends to already over explain or like bombard me with information to the point where I sort of like instinctually have a hard time continuing to ask for more information because I'm already overwhelmed by like everything that's been thrown at me in the first place. So like that's not good for sort of navigating the disagreement. So does anybody have any tools for dealing with that?
I was just gonna say, it can be tricky if the person is presenting things that they think is evidence for their opinion or view, but you don't necessarily think that that evidence supports that view, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So one strategy is redirection. This is something I have to do professionally working with students. Sometimes students do the same thing. They say a lot of stuff and you need to redirect them. So you can, if this person is giving you a lot of information, you can say things like, thank you. I appreciate you telling me all that. I'm really curious about this specific point. I don't understand this thing. Can you tell me more about this? But I'm imagining maybe have you already tried that, like getting them to specify or redirecting them?
No, I think that's helpful. I guess I tend to get in the state of being overwhelmed, and then like maybe I should think more about specific like one. I'll just focus on like one point that I need clarification on, and just have to kind of let the rest go until we, like I don't know, just sort of like iteratively deal with a disagreement instead of like trying to let all the disagreement like wash over me at once.
I think that is a good strategy. That strategy is useful in lots of domains. For example, I interned at this clinic for treating children with conduct disorder, which is behavior problems that include things like setting fires and getting into fights.
Hmm.
And the treatment was primarily directed at parents for like how to direct children. And one of the things they said was like, you need to take a break from this at some point. It can't be that 24 hours a day you're trying to control your child's behavior. And so if you, yeah, try and break it down and say, I'm just going to focus on this one thing that I'm going to solve right now, it maybe will feel more manageable. And it does suck to feel like you have to let go of all the other stuff. But if you take maybe a step back and like a longer term view and play the long game, it's not so much that you're letting go of the other stuff forever, but just saying for right now, if we focus on this one thing.
Okay, cool. Very helpful. Thanks.
Sometimes also like just not the content, but the volume of information being thrown at you in contexts like that, if it repeats over time, you see another email that's like, 10 pages long, it can be triggering. It doesn't matter what it says, but it just, when that kind of pattern repeats, kind of feel like we're back in this cycle again. So yeah, I think trying to dissect out little snippets at a time and focus on like what the highest priority ticket item is.
I'm actually using AI for that.
Yeah.
If I get a big email, like a long email, and I'm overwhelmed and I'm busy and stuff, I will throw it in GPT for DSCI and be like, please tell me what this person is looking for. Like, what are the salient points? What are they looking for in the end? So at least it gives me a jumping off point, and then I can read the email like in control of it.
Yes.
That's been.
I think that can be really helpful also just because it will come out with a different tone.
Yeah.
Or
like
a different
neutral tone.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're finding that person's language to be triggering for some reason, it'll be rephrased and that trigger can be processed.
I do also want to add that I have been on the other side of this. I've lost count of the number of times I've received a response to an email that says, thank you for your detailed email, which I have interpreted as I maybe included more detail than was necessary. So it's possible, I mean, everyone's different, but some people are receptive to feedback. And if you said like, I don't have enough time to read all of that, or like this was more than I needed, some people are going to change. Not everyone, I admit, but some people.
I think this is more than I needed. It's much more positive, opening to conversation that I don't have time to read.
Yeah.
As much as you would prefer to say, I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think. So like I said, what they did say was this, thank you for your detailed email, which sent a message. Trying to think of other things that would not have hurt my feelings.
I think you could say like, this is all really helpful, thank you. But let me focus on just this one
Yeah.
point here.
Any other questions, comments, suggestions? Okay, I will say one more thing, which is actually the best way probably to learn to disagree better is through role playing, which I did not force anyone to do. But if anyone wants to like practice a disagreement, I am free to help you with that. Just reach out. And maybe with that, we'll say thank you for coming, and we will see you next time.